So that's one piece, but there was this instinct to say fixing prayer is going to be negative, right? There's a whole view in the Talmud that that's a bad idea because it's going to kill kavanah. It's going to kill the idea that people speak their own mind. The Shla, Rabbi Yeshai Levi Horowitz, was a very important Kabbalist and legal thinker who influenced beforehand a lot of the Hasidic tradition. It's one of the most incredible tomes of non-learned work. And it's not commonly learned. And he, in his chapter on prayer, what he calls Masechet Tamid, the chapter on like the offerings, he notes there and gives heft to this Talmudic idea that you have to add, or you could add, your own content to any prayer. So you should say the fixed text, but that's a springboard for your own thoughts. So and so you can. I think a lot of people don't know like you could add your own words, but in fact, there's an idea that it's either good or even required to be mechadesh badavar, to have a piece of prayer that is your own. And so how would that work? Say you're reciting the Amidah and you're at the prayer on healing. So then you stop mid-prayer of the prayer on healing and you say something, right? Like, right, and God, like, please heal us from this horrible pandemic. Please allow social distancing to have proper effects, to flatten the curve, etc. Right? You actually pray the things that you're doing. And what does that do? What do I mean by that? So say one would pray in the prayers, because I actually find this to be the most useful piece of prayer advice, second most useful piece of prayer advice I ever got. I got it from the Shla in his book, right? Which is to really work to make sure to try and add something personal that you feel to each prayer. So if you would do that, it makes it very real suddenly, but there's the question of like, am I not just elevating my own personal desires into prayer? Like, who says what I think is the right thing to do is the right thing to do? And so Rav Kook explains it this way in the introduction to his Siddur. And stop if anyone has a comment. I'm just sort of reflecting on this. Rav Kook's explanation speaks a lot to me, which is that the act of delving deep within. We might think of prayer as like a vertical thing. I'm praying up to a deity, but Rav Kook looks at it as first a deep dive within one's own soul. Right? So going in to figure out deeply, what are my deepest desires? What do I really want? And it's sort of through diving in that one reaches this place of communion with the Creator. And actually what that helps to do is sort of purify, clarify, serve as a divine vetting of our desires, right? Like, which is to say, this is something I want, and is it something I could ask God for? If I had to ask God for it, who sort of has the most perspective on all of this and has priorities just right, is it something I can do? Or is it something I ought not ask for? I ought change the request in some way. Am I thinking about it the wrong way? So the act of having to place it into a conversation with, it's kind of like theater, right? And in theater, one is creating a fictitious situation through acting, but it's very real, right? And actors get into the role. They don't pretend to be in the role. I mean, they are experiencing the emotions and the physical sensations of doing those things, good actors, and they're fully in the role and absorbed in it. And that has a sort of an effect. So I think prayer is a lot like acting, right? It's not so much about the theology of God as much as this notion of doing this thing, right? Whether you think someone is listening or not, prayer is efficacious or it isn't, but it's true that the act of placing of being in a dialogue with God and asking for things, specific things in your life is gonna affect how you ask for, and that I think is going to change how we live a little bit. I know every time I've been able to pray and really ask for things, which is not that often, but when I do it, I always feel afterwards like I need to edit my daily to-do list. Like whatever I've decided I'm going to do that day, I've forgotten some crucial things on the list. And there are some things on that list which need to happen in a different way. Some fights I'm going to pick, like respond to angry email from so-and-so, either gets crossed off the list, and call so-and-so who is sick gets added to the list, right? So that's just a personal description of how this prayer practice changes who we are and how we act. So we become agents of the prayer. Like, I'm not ask God for it. I ought to be doing what I'm doing. And so am I doing that? That's part of the prayer. I've gone off key here. I apologize for the monologue. Reflections, reactions. So I've reflected on Linda's comment about fixed prayer, and then Eric's comments about, well, the prayer kind of grounds me in a way by bringing it back to certain priorities. There's a sort of not just comfort, but both are true, and both are true in the stages. So I'm kind of saying actually that as a practical matter, prayer can be more of a combination than I think people give themselves permission. I think because it's in a book, we have printed books, they didn't have the printing press. We are often reading and not praying, right? So we open the book and we're reading what it says. But the act of prayer is not an act of reading. It's more like being an actor. It's more thespian than literary. And so it's about having a dialogue with God. And so a useful prayer exercise would be to imagine yourself engaged in a dialogue with God, because that's what praying is. And so if you can get into that role, and the book in that case might just be the lines, but the lines are actually directed at someone. It's a dialogue. And how does that look? Speaks to people, doesn't speak to people, push back, agree, take it from a different angle. I'm just throwing this out there. It's a personal.
Well, I'm going to apply that thespian idea at my next opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's I've found it to be efficacious. So here we have this debate between the Rambam and the Ramban, and you'll have left here sort of knowing the debate, that the Ramban feels that at a time of distress, and I'm going to posit that it's because at a time of distress, that's where prayer, is kind of automatically not in vain, right? Like at a time of coronavirus, let's say, of global financial collapse, of health crisis, of frailty, of humility, of all of these things that are occurring, if one were to pray, you don't need to think about, well, is there anything to pray for? There are lots of things to be thankful for and lots of things individually we might pray for, but there is a big thing that we're all working towards and praying for. And so the Ramban's sense is that that's biblical, but not the everyday mundane. The prayer that people struggle with is prayer that people, there's a chat. See what the chat says. Okay, the comment is, I'll read it out loud. I realize not all prayer is conducted in shul as musical, that's in the synagogue, but there's something very spiritual about prayers as talking to Hashem through harmony, regardless of whether one understands the words chosen by others before us. Beautiful. So just raising the prospect that prayer isn't only words, that it might be music, and not just music, but harmony, the ways in which we interact with others. There's sort of another element to this, right, which is mentioned in the Ramban here, which is that sound the trumpets and the horns kind of a thing. Distress, like cry out, almost like shofar, right, wailing, horn blowing, distress. So there's a sort of just audible, visceral musical prayer. There's harmonious, beautiful musical prayer, and there's meditative and contemplative prayer, or as the Rambam, right? It was funny because the Rambam is among the most theological of all great Jewish thinkers and kind of the most into the words as having some kind of major function. But as he says in the Guide to the Perplexed, that in the future he imagines that prayer will be about, to you, quoting from Psalms, silence is prayer, or Simon and Garfunkel would have said, right? The sound of silence is a form of prayer, that can be offered up as an offering. And what does that mean, right? To offer up silence as prayer, sort of inchoate, right? To say that it's not about a specific need we have, but maybe it's an existential feature of being human. Maybe this is what the Rambam means. So maybe we're entering the debate now, right? Good. This has helped me clarify a point. The Rambam says in the Guide to Perplex that there's this sort of ultimate prayer of L'cha dumia tehillah, to you silence is prayer, God. And it could be that for Maimonides, prayer is existential, right? It's not about, there's coronavirus and so it's tough, or, I need a job. But broadly, we're always in a posture of being in great need. if we can get comparative for a moment, right? This might be, so compare contrast. I'll ask people to chime in here. I don't know if people are familiar with the Buddhist concept of dukkha. One, I think it's the first noble truth. I am not a Buddhist or a Buddhist scholar, but right, this idea that of suffering, but of the temporary nature of everything and the unsatisfactory nature of everything, right? That everything that happens is never, it's all passing and it's over. And whether it's good or bad, it doesn't last. And it's never fully satisfying. Back to our benching, right? We're never satisfied from a Buddhist perspective. So relate that to the Rambam, who says it's always a biblical commandment to pray. Maybe that he doesn't disagree with the Ramban about the nature of prayer coming from a sense of distress. He just disagrees about the source of distress. Is it a condition of being human that we are in some kind of source of anxious distress? Or maybe the Ramban feels that, yes, maybe that's true on some theoretical level, but what probably causes us to reach out is impending doom. When there's a calamity, that's when we pray. And that's when we ought to, we don't, there's a rabbinic commandment otherwise, but we don't need to overdo it. So these are debates that are live among people, I think. And so I just wanted to see that in the sages. We'll do a few more things. There's a lot more to say, but I wanted to talk maybe about prayer prep and also kavanah. So this is a pet peeve of mine. Who has gone to, if people are around and willing to participate either in the chat or verbally, I'd appreciate it. Does anyone have any practice they do, be it a sport, yoga, a martial art, I don't know, chess, bridge, some kind of thing where you prepare just before, like you try and get in a frame of mind?
Well, I do.
Is that Linda?
Yeah, it's Linda.
Okay, Linda.
Well, I certainly do that if I'm going to exercise or do yoga, because you don't want to eat right beforehand and you want to be awake, and ready to go. But I also do that before I go to work, to get myself in the right frame of mind to kind of roll with things and also be alert, and on top of things at the same time. And that takes a lot of active energy for me. And probably if I pray at all, I pray like all through the day at work. So little prayers that, are the prayers that everybody knows, because it keeps me focused, and focused on the other person, not myself so much, which is appropriate in my case. In the case of what I do. So
yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so that's what I do. So I can't say I prepare for prayer, but I use prayer to prepare for other things.
Okay, so prayer for you is preparation for other things, right? So the question is sort of a multi-layered, disorganized question, which is, do you have a thing in your life or practice that you kind of prepare for? And I tried to name things that it might have that. And then do you prepare to pray is the sort of other end, which I don't even know if I named, but you intuited it correctly.
I don't know.
Yeah. Now, Emily, did I see you unmute yourself there? Were you trying to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I also definitely have to prepare myself for going into my job. So if I don't do some stretches before, I'm going to be hurting by the end of the day for sure. Likewise, preparing as well. Like, I definitely have to be kind and civil to everyone that I, even if they're not to me. So I definitely have to get into the right frame of mind for that.
Yeah, and as it relates to prayer, you don't have to add anything, but is there anything you'd want to add in that sense? You know, have you ever thought about or practiced prayer in that way as like, or even not formally, but just is there a
And
prep?
yeah, definitely. Like there was definitely a time where I take the trolley to go to shul, and there was a
Hmm.
time I had to take the bus to go to the trolley, and I thought I was going to be late. I was like, the trolley went right past me, and then another one came kind of late, so I was just, like kind of freaking out. So on the trolley on the way there, I started like doing a little bit of stretching, some breathing exercises, because it was just like I need to be in the right frame of mind for shul, for prayer. Like I can't just show up like stressed out. I need to start now, and continue to do so through the first bit.
Hmm. Thanks. And Bob, I don't know. I think you're chattable. If Bob and or Eric want to chat us. So Eric says yes. Before arguing in court, another
Yeah.
practice, the practice of litigation in your case,
So do
or
you
any.
like, or like, how is that helpful? Is it help to, this is for Eric really, is it helpful in preparing your mind or to focus on the question at hand? Like in what way
Hmm.
is that helpful to you?
I didn't understand his questions about prayer before. Right. I think Eric Lintz is asking you, like, in what way is it helpful to you to prepare? Like, how do you prepare for court?
Oh,
You usually want to be in a
for the frame of
particular
mind.
frame of mind.
Yeah, yeah.
I see. So this Mishnah is, I think, the one which is ignored, and it's codified in our legal codes and everything, but I think it's the one that's ignored at our own peril. And for me, it's showing up late, actually. I'll just name the personal struggle to model it. I'm one of those people that I don't know, even when I'm on time, I sabotage myself and make myself late for things. It's just a habit of, I'll do two more things, I'm actually on time, and then I'm late and I know it. And being late for prayer is like anything, right? It's hard to get settled in the right way when you're a little frazzled, when I'm a little frazzled. It says here, "Ein omdim lahitpalel mitoch koved rosh." One should never go to pray except from a place of a serious or heavy state of mind. Not like, it doesn't have to be overly serious, but I think the point here is a referent frame. And then it says, "Chasidim harishonim hayishuin sha'achat mitpalim." The early sages would pause for 1 hour and pray, in order to direct their hearts to the omnipresent. And the Mishnah goes on to say, even if you're getting killed by a snake, don't stop. But the maybe we'll read that just for its affect. Even if Donald Trump interrupts your Amidah, don't respond. And even if a snake is round around your leg, it's winding its way up, and this isn't a garter snake, this is a cobra. Lo yafsik, don't stop praying. Now in the Talmud that comments on the missions, those things are heavily amended, curtailed, and distinguished, so that if you're going to die, stop praying. But the beginning part, they expand and say that the root of this idea that the early sages paused for an hour is from a command. It's not just a practice they had, and it's that of Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yahalalu Chasela in the Talmud. The derivation is, fortunate are those that dwell, Yoshvei Beitecha, in your house. Od is like an expression of more, Yahalalucha Sela, praise will come out. So the Talmud understands that before praise can emerge from within, Ashrei Yoshvei Vetecha, we have to be dwelling in a place. In other words, there's sort of a comfort with the very place of the presence of Hashem, like the sanctified place of a synagogue. So it's actually being in that place of reverence and awe which causes prayer to emerge, or that's the model, and that the way to do that is showing sha'achat, okay, whether that's a moment, an hour, but the idea is to, it's a requirement, a legal requirement, to first come and be silent and kind of meditate or contemplate in a place. And there are different suggestions about what the particular contemplative practice was. And so to after, the Talmud will later say as well, that one should do the same. And actually these practices are crucial for prayer. And yet I feel, and they're gaining popularity, right? But often in our public prayer spaces in the Jewish world, that's not a given. It's not a given that we don't get enough, and I'm in charge of an institution, so I'm speaking to myself. We don't get enough into a prayer frame of mind, and we don't cultivate intentionally what that would look like. So I guess the question is, what might that look like for you? In other words, I think since it's not done anyway, it's not like we must follow the form of the sages in that regard. Do you have a sense for you of what it would look like? What would be the thing to get you to get the prayers flowing? You know, it's kind of like writing, right? You don't want to have writer's block in a sort of particular place to have the ideas coming out. What would it get to get the prayers coming out? Is it the prayer itself? Is it the space, as the Talmud imagines? Is it silent contemplation, as emphasized in the Mishnah? Is it different? Is it song? Is it something else? Can share or not, but it's just opening the question.
Maybe that's I have to get okay. You know, maybe there needs to be a group of 10 or more has something to do with getting in the mood. The energy of other people. You can be off on your own trajectory, and then you enter a space and there's other people, and that energy can, combine to create a mood. I've certainly had that experience. Alone, you don't have it, but with others, perhaps you do. Even if you don't know them, but you're all kind of there for the same reason. But that's not really answering your question as to prep. But I think just the going to a place with other people alone could be a prep without it being such an internal, intellectual or thing or solitary thing.
I like that, right? That it's really about community and other people, and it's not solitary, right? As you name, which takes us out of this idea of sort of meditation or contemplation as a very specific solitary thing. I know for me, often actually a little sort of song can open up, maybe in a group. Singing alone doesn't quite do the same thing. So I wanted to close with one passage. I'll recommend two books if you're really looking to get into, if you're looking to learn the laws of prayer. Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah is the most organized formulation, and it's all available on Sefaria.org. Maimonides Laws of Prayer. You'll be there, or if you can't find it, email me and I'll get you the link. But there are two really great books out on prayer that I love. There are more. Recommend a few here. Some resources and then a quote from one. I happen to have them on my bookshelf behind me. So we've got this, Worship of the Heart, Essays on Jewish Prayer from Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. Really both thoughtful, in the classic, he's an intellectual, right, from that tradition, but so philosophically based, but soulful. They're not dry. Sort of a little more heady, but really great. Holistic Prayer, A Guide to Jewish Spirituality by Rabbi Avraham Weiss. A great book about holistic prayer. A really sweet book. This is in Hebrew, but it just came out in English. Tikon tfilati, prepare my prayer, or in English, prepare my prayer, from Magid Press. If you go to Koren Publishers website, you'll see it there. Prepare My Prayer by Rabbi Dov Zinger. And this is a cookbook of prayer. And he treats the prayers like, what if a prayer was like a recipe and you were cooking it, right? So every dish is different ingredients and a different flavor profile. Some are savory, some are sweet, some are light, some are heavy, etc. A very different take from Israel, but a beautiful new bestseller. And then on the sheet here, I've brought us the source, The Gates of Prayer, 12 Talks on Davenology from Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who people may have heard of. He was a Chabad rabbi of the prior Chabad Rebbe, not the one that passed away most recently, but before that. And then he became sort of, I think he was a little too free to be bounded in an Orthodox or Chabad setting. And so he went from that sort of Hasidic tradition to a more open renewal kind of place. But he wrote great books about sort of gave great talks about inner prayer life. And they're recorded in this, The Gates of Prayer, 12 Talks on Davenology, kind of the science of davening, as it were, davenology, great word. And so I'll close by just reading his words here because I think they're powerful, some of my favorite. And then we'll pause for any final questions. In prayer, the important question is, whom do you want to address? Ze'eli, so there's a verse, right? Ze'eli v'anvehu Elohei avi v'aromemenu. This is my God and I will worship him. The God of my father and I will exalt him. So this is my God, v'anvehu, and I will, the one with whom I have my personal relationship, or the God of my forebears, Elohei avi v'aromemenu, who I will exalt. There are some people who can't make it beyond the God of tradition. They haven't had access to personal experiences of divine. So they say, I have to do it just like my father did it. I have to say all the prayers exactly as they have been said before. Otherwise, I'm not fulfilling my obligation. I am not yotze, is the language. I haven't fulfilled it. I haven't fulfilled my obligation. For some people, this is a necessity. And even for others who have had personal experiences, this is still valid, right? Their own personal spirit. But still, there's this sense in which for thousands of years, people have prayed in exactly this way. And so I feel this, right? I must adhere to the language of Ezra and his Bezdin, his court, as the Rambam said. I will do this exactly like my father did because this is for my spiritual discipline and I need my discipline. There is much to be said for sacred routine. Professor Abraham Joshua Heschel had a good way of talking about this. He would tell the following parable. There was a small town that had no watchmaker. When they needed to repair their watches, they had to wait for the watchmaker to come to town. When he came, he would charge two different prices. For those who wound their watches every day, even though they didn't keep the right time, he charged less. Those who did not wind their watches at all, he charged more. This was because the watches that had been wound every day, even though not keeping time, were easier to repair. Therefore, every morning when you're davening, that's the Yiddish for praying, even if it's routine, like winding the watch, this is good. It will make it easier to fix any issues you're having in your davening. This is an interesting idea, right? If you daven frequently, like think of it like a baseball swing, since baseball season won't be happening anymore, right? And so sometimes a baseball player falls into a slump in the middle of the season. They've had a lot of at-bats, right? But like we've all been in that place where we do something a lot, we've got a groove, and then suddenly we like lose it. We lose the feel for it. Our confidence gets shaken, but out of a place of doing a lot. But it's easier in some ways to do that than being really rusty. Like I just tried to play the piano again after not really having played seriously for more than a decade. And it's different than just losing my groove amidst a period of heavy practice. It's a whole different thing. The fingers are slower and weaker. Said a different way, maybe I'll say it slightly differently, could be that if we're frequently praying, that we're more likely to have a deep prayer experience sometimes, even if not most of the time. But the more we pray, it's possible that sometimes something might really click. It doesn't have to be always, but if we pray infrequently, it's even less likely, and it would be very rare. that's a way of saying this. That is also dealing with Elohe Aviv Memenu, my father is God. A lot of what my parents deposited into that God space is spiritual capital that I can draw on. This is why we speak of zchut avot, parental merit. It gives us energy, the strength to keep us together when the wind blows hard upon us. Some days I find that I'm so tired it feels as if I have no growing edge. So what do? I say to myself, today I will just daven the siddur because I am tired. I cannot free myself to go higher, right? I felt that this morning. I'm just going to say the words, get them out, the end. But on other days, when I am, thank God, more focused and energized, I invest more deeply and juice myself up. I will meditate on this is my God and let it take me where it's going to take me. Let me spell this one out. This is so beautiful and important. Rabbi Emmanuel Rackman, alav shalom, translated the words, and he was the past president actually of the Rabbinical Council of America, translated the words Yatsa Yedei Chovatau, which means to fulfill your obligation in prayer in this case, as extricated himself. He removed himself from the grasp of obligation. Now take a look at how this appears in life, meaning not only did I fulfill my obligation, but I fulfilled it by being no longer obligated. I only fulfill my obligation to pray when I don't treat it like an obligation. I'm free of obligation by praying, because you get the pun? It's like I'm free of obligation when I'm free of obligation. If I treat it like an obligation, then I'm not praying. And I get stuck in always being obligated to pray better. But if I treat it like I'm not obligated, then I'm really free of obligation. So it's an interesting kind of way of mistranslating it. Now take a look at how this appears in life. Many people look upon obligation as burdens. Okay, I've done it already. You can't have a lien on me anymore. So he was saying that he had extricated himself from that burden. It's really important for us to extricate ourselves from the sense of being burdened by these things, from the negative connotation, and to do them with a renewed sense of freedom. So my hope actually in teaching this class about structure is to remove some of that burden a little bit and give us a sense of freedom, that we can kind of play with this a little more. That it's like when you're new at cooking a recipe, you follow it very carefully and it still doesn't come out quite right. But when you're like good at something, you know, okay, my oven's a little hot, or if I add a little more of this spice, it's gonna, you become like a master of it. So that's the sense we want, is to sort of develop mastery to kind of free our practice, to be able to really work with this in a way that isn't just, okay, I played the piano song and I got all the notes right, but to mess with the dynamic curve, to play it according to the mood we're in, to think about prayer, maybe like a musical instrument is the good metaphor from Eric before. I hope this has been a useful introduction. To review what we discussed today, we really discussed three sorts of things. The first was we discussed prayer, and petitionary prayer in particular, as it emerges from blessings, right? It's related in the Rambam to the notion of blessing. So it's not like prayer and blessing are different things, but prayer and petitions and gratitude and praise are all for one aim, right? The same aim as the blessings on food and that kind of thing, in order to develop a constant mindful awareness of the Creator, to always be thinking God has created this, and why mimenu, because that gives us a sense of awe. This is incredible. God has made this. It's remarkable that we're here. Yeah, there's still anxiety, but this is a remarkable kind of thing. And that also can give us a sense of fear. Like I better treat this with the proper reference. It's the opposite of nihilism, right? It gives us, or the opposite of despair, as Linda noted, right? It gives us that sense of lived radical amazement, as Heschel talked about. And then we discussed the debate between the Rambam and the Ramban. Is prayer a biblical thing? Is it in the Torah that you have to pray or not? That's what we discussed. And the Rambam says it is. It's in the Torah. You have to pray every day. And the Ramban said, well, the Talmud doesn't treat it like that. They treat it like a rabbinic idea. The only time it's biblical is if you're in a disaster. We're in a disaster, so it's biblical now. And that's because that's when it's real. And the Rambam might have responded, if he were a philosopher, which he was, and might say, well, that's nice, but as humans, we're always in an existential state of crisis. Or the Buddha might have said life is temporary and full of suffering. And so that's sort of what we said. And then we went on to getting in the frame of mind for prayer. These were sort of backgrounds, right? Like, okay, so that's the root of prayer, is this idea of serving God and developing a constant awareness and awe-based awareness, or maybe it's about distress and sort of channeling our distress towards God in a way. So we talked about the frame of mind. We talked about pausing beforehand, about how to treat prayer as a practice that we get ready for, which the sages required us to do to get into a particular frame of mind and what might do that, about what prayer theologically might do from a perspective of Cook. And then at the end, from Rav Zalman Schachter Shalomi, we talked about this idea of praying. I think a lot of people pray and say, well, this is the traditional thing and I'm carrying on the tradition. But of course, the tradition of prayer is to have a dynamic conversation in the current moment. And so it's a tradition about a dynamic and current engagement with an active creator who's constantly renewing. And so that's the idea, is that it can't only be traditional. Maybe it can't not be traditional either. If we say, well, I'll just do my own thing, we're disconnected from sort of the continuum of space-time and all the generations before and after, which exist now in some way. And so it becomes an individualist endeavor. But there's also this sense in which it can become an individualistic or narcissistic endeavor to say, I am fulfilling my traditional obligations, with an emphasis on the big capital I, fulfill my obligations. And usually the parentheses after, and they did not, or they've done it wrong. And here, Zalman Schachter Shalomi sort of corrects us in sort of balancing the two and saying, you know, this is my God and the God of my fathers, and to free ourselves from the sense of burden is the only way to really fulfill the obligation. And that praying, it could be in the traditional frame of mind or traditional liturgy or traditional way, but it always has to be current. I'll add that the best ways to do this are to prepare for prepare for prayer, tongue twister. I think silence, music, whatever you need to do along, just getting in a place to pray before praying and finding a thing that does that and doing it and not just accidentally having it happen sometimes or not. That's A. And B is asking for real things in your life in the prayers of those things. So in the prayer for wisdom, ask for wisdom to deal with things you have to deal with. In the prayer for healing, ask for healing for the sick people you know, etc. And with that, I will conclude tonight's Back to the Basics. I hope you have gained something from this exposition of some sources. I see one chat there.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
all. And I wish you well. It's been a pleasure to gather at this time and learn together.
All right. Good night. Thank you. Be well,
Good night,
everybody.
everyone.